pretty hot topic about Ben Stokes pulling out of the series, understandably so. And this has been the trend across the sporting arena, like Simone Biles on gymnastics. And then last year we had Michael Phelps in swimming doing the Naomi Osaka in tennis. Is this a serious problem which the sporting bodies now have to consider, especially with what has happened in the last 2 years or so?
It's possibly exacerbated by bubble life. If you look at poor old Ben Stokes, he's gone from bubble to bubble, lost his dad. There's contributing factors in there that, he might just have got himself to a point where it was this series or the Ashes. But he just had to have that break. The ECB, I think, have said all the right things and are doing the right things in expressing their support. I think the timing, possibly, I'd like him to have said it before he played in the 200 games he played in, but that's being slightly picky. I think it's exacerbated by bubble life. It's not a surprise, but certainly those bubbles incessantly are going to be hard work for players mentally, no doubt about it.
And it's something the ECB saw coming. They knew this after last year when they had the players in very tight bubbles where it was ground, hotel, and the ground and the hotel are in the same place. They got the feedback that this is not going to be sustainable for months on end. And so this is why they've decided to essentially give players enforced breaks over the winter period that we had with the Sri Lanka series and with the India series. They said everyone in those squads is getting a break at some point. We are not having anyone play throughout that period because it is not in our interests to have you burn out like that. I think it was actually Giles said in so many words, we would rather rest people before there's a problem than afterwards.
Yeah, and
Ben Stokes has had 2 breaks since it hit. 1, he took a break last year to be with his very ill father, and 2, this year he's had an injury break. As far as the timing, it happens when it happens. You don't get to choose when something like this, when mental health becomes too big an issue to ignore. As far as the boards go, they are more so than I think England, better than most boards. It helps that there's the players have representation. They have a players' union who they can talk to. They have the PCA. They have those resources on hand. Other countries aren't quite in that position, but we're past the time of athletes just being seen as units of productivity and nothing else.
Yeah, I have to agree with that. I think obviously there's a problem. I think he's still probably got problems with his finger. They thought that would heal as well, but I think that's by the by, really, isn't it? He's had problems with his dad, and clearly everything's come on top. And as the other two have said, they've been in bubbles pretty much for 18 months, one way or the other, and they are quite tight bubbles. And you have a family life as well. Your life isn't just sport, and I think it probably just gets on top. I mean, there's this whole issue with the Ashes now that the ACB are unsure whether they want to let England's families in, and we've got to go from a bubble in England against India, probably to a bubble somewhere else. Then they've got the World Cup, and then straight on to Australia, which is basically 6 months of being in a bubble without seeing your family. And they've spent the last pretty much year and a half doing that as well, and see what happens. But the Australia tour might be in danger too. So
yeah, it's setting good precedent. Ben Stokes, I mean, credit to him going so far, playing for England, pulling out shows quite a strong character for him, and hopefully this is for the betterment. And there were some reactions on Twitter as well saying, should cricket also have something called an off season across the board for 6 to 7 months? I mean, I don't know how much boards can afford that, but what do you think about that idea?
Well, it's a tricky one, isn't it, that one? Because, I mean, in reality, it does have that in a country. We have our summer, we play April to September, probably October now, given the way they've sidelined the 4-day championship. But your top players then go and play in franchises. The ones who are serious about their test careers will probably seek out, opportunities to play in Australia as well. So global. It's a global sport where the seasons become irrelevant. So I don't think it's about cricket per se having an off season. I think it might be about finding ways for players to have almost a compulsory downtime at an individual level. But there's always cricket somewhere in the world because the world goes round, and that's what the seasons do. So
even if you weren't playing any franchise cricket, England play 17, 18 Test matches a year between the home and away tours. I think they're playing. It is different. I will say though, England and India don't have an off season. Their players are in demand all the time. If you wanted to play all of that, you basically wouldn't get a break. The calendar is very skewed though, because for example, New Zealand or South Africa go a long time without playing a Test match, and other countries do that as well. Countries like Ireland and Zimbabwe, who have been granted full member status, or the top-ranking associate nations like Scotland and the Netherlands, they're crying out for more cricket. So we've got to this situation where some boards are pushing their players as hard as they can for profit maximization, and some boards can't afford to play more cricket. Were we living in a sport, or were we working in a sport that had a centralized governing body that could actually set a proper, sensible fixture schedule, maybe this wouldn't have arisen quite so much. But the point you made is right. A lot of boards are trying to cram in as much cricket to fill the hole in the finances left by COVID. So,
well,
the Australians made a decision, didn't they? The Australians made a decision about the 100, and I don't know whether it was at an individual level or a board level, but the fact is the Australians per se pulled out.
And they didn't tour the West Indies. And they didn't tour the West Indies either, many of those players.
Yeah, so they're a bit naughty and a bit selective about who they do and don't play against. Yeah. However, they have carved time for their players, and can't remember if it was Knackle or Bear, but the top players are in demand all around the world all the time, because that's what you've got to put a cap on.
Some of this has been brought around by COVID. For example, the World T20 should have been last year. The IPL should have been finished this year. So we would have had a break between the end of the India series, and then we'd have gone to Australia. Every other year, England don't play a series over the Christmas period and stuff like that. So sometimes we can go from October all the way through till February or whatever without playing cricket. I think this is a particularly weird time because of all these, readjustments to the schedule and tours being cancelled and then being put on precisely for that reason, that they were scheduled and therefore there's an income supposed to come from it. And so like England's tour of Sri Lanka was supposed to be last year, it ended up being at the beginning of this year because Sri Lanka needed the money, etc, etc, etc. I mean, England play 20 something tests this year before.
I think it's 18 tests this year.
But then we then we go out to the West Indies at the beginning of next year, pretty much after the Ashes as well.
And there's a series to play in Pakistan as a goodwill gesture for Pakistan coming here last summer, and basically filling a hole in the ECB's finances. What you'll probably get is, Australia, Maxwell and Smith and Warner and so forth didn't go to the West Indies, but they sent 18. England have had 2 teams playing at the same time. India have got a squad in Sri Lanka, or just left. Now, the bigger boards can afford to do that, but if you're New Zealand or Sri Lanka or any other smaller board that you had to name, or a poorer board, you can't afford to have 2 teams on tour at the same time of 20 plus players with coaching staff. I do worry that this is
about a team that's now the world Test champions.
Well,
who have got their players some time off now. Yeah. So actually, you kind of go, well, hang on, that seems to work okay. Bit less cricket, doesn't seem to be doing them any harm.
No.
Well, sure. But they, New Zealand play 2 Test series at home because they can't afford to play anymore. There's a lot that the scheduling can do to help in this. I think it probably will get better, as Bear is saying, once COVID is less of a factor, and tours become a little bit. Excuse me. Tours become quite a lot easier when you can have your family with them, you're not in your hotel all of the time for however many months it is, or
absolutely
6 weeks or whatever. If you can get out and see things a little bit, it becomes a little bit more palatable. And you're not having to potentially quarantine on return. If you spend 3 weeks at home, but 10 of them are in quarantine, that's even less of a break that you're getting.
So Sri Lanka, and it's Durham Town Centre.
Yeah. Well,
in which case you're definitely not allowed to go.
We get a chance to talk about that. What one board is letting its players take time off. One board is, well, anyway. That could be a whole show in itself. But yeah, it's phenomenally difficult, even for the very top players. who are very well supported.
Correct. And to top this all, right, in addition to the sporting calendar, in addition to the bubbles, don't forget what just happened with Krunal Pandya, unfortunately. He tested positive and 10 others were in the close proximity. So that's in itself another stress, saying that what is going to happen? And then again, getting isolated, stranded, not traveling. This time goes on.
It's happened with this test tour. The throwdown specialist, Dayanand Garani, tested positive, and two players had to, the Ridhaman Saha and Abhimanyu Ishwaran, who were training with him, had to isolate for 10 days in the middle of a tour. So they've already done their isolation period. Ridhaman Saha has already had COVID this year. They come, and then they have to isolate in the middle of a tour when they should be training. Rishabh Pant, probably partly through his own, probably going to Wimbledon wasn't, and Wembley wasn't the smartest idea, but whatever. He spent part of his 3-week break 10 days of his 3-day break in isolation. It's all of these things are just making touring life, which was already a bit of a problem when you're spending 6 months of the year away from home, to have any kind of family life, any kind of life outside of being a sporting unit of productivity was harder then, and it's even harder now.